Hi, I'm Stephen.
And I'm Celine from the Cult Hackers podcast.
So I'm a former member of a high control group, otherwise known as a cult, who left when I was about 30. That's about the time my daughter was born. That's you, Celine.
We explore what it's like to be in a cult and leave one. We interview former members and leading cult experts. And we also talk about the long journey of making sense of the world afterwards.
Yeah, that's a journey that you've witnessed and helped me with.
I'm a media graduate interested in the place cults have in our society.
And I'm an organisational psychologist these days with an interest in leadership and who also studies cults and cultic groups.
There's a new episode every week where we look at cults from every angle and attempt to crack the cult code.
So search for Cult Hackers on your favourite podcast app and catch up with us every Saturday.
Hello listeners and welcome to this week's mini-series on Xenos Christian Fellowship, known today as Dwell Community Church. I'm your speaker Casey, and I've been wondering lately how many times have big companies, groups or even churches rebranded when they've been put under scrutiny. 247wallstreet.com says that in 1997 the Lance Armstrong Foundation was created in the wake of Armstrong's testicular cancer diagnosis, with an aim of raising money for cancer research. After it came out that the 7-time Tour de France champion had undeniably used performance-enhancing drugs throughout his career, the charity renamed itself, going from the Lance Armstrong Foundation to the Livestrong Foundation. Smith & Wesson, the popular firearm brand, changed their company name to American Outdoors Brand Corporation, most likely in response to the volatile firearms market and ongoing firearms debates in America. An unassuming title that certainly doesn't cause one to think immediately of mass shootings and gun violence. One more big one to note is the rebranding of the Philip Morris Company. Taken again from the Wall Street website, Philip Morris, maker of brands like Marlboro, changed its name to Altria Group Inc. in 2003, on the same day that the company was cleared of responsibility in a wrongful death case. The move had been planned since 2001. Philip Morris claimed that the name change was intended to emphasize that the company sells a wide array of products, in addition to the famous tobacco brand, but the assumption for many is that the move was largely to disassociate the company from its controversial product. An anti-tobacco group, Intact, called the plan a PR maneuver meant to distance the corporation's image from its deadly business practices. The tobacco units, Philip Morris International and Philip Morris USA, kept their original names. Today's guest is Emma. Emma talks us through her experiences in what used to be named Xenos Christian Fellowship, but recently underwent its own rebranding to Dwell Community Church. Throughout the years, the controversial street-styled Christian movement that makes use of Bible houses instead of traditional church buildings, occupying student-heavy areas in Ohio, has been the subject of allegations regarding horrific living conditions within these houses, with former members speaking out about abuse, coercive and cult-like methods of control, and more. In this 2-part series, Emma talks us through her early life involved in the group before becoming totally committed, undergoing awful experiences as part of her dedication to her spirituality, before escaping and rebuilding her life. During this interview, my youngest child, who is still only very small, was experiencing some teething pains. When my partner was unable to settle her, she joined us towards the end of the interview, which has never happened before, so I do apologise if you hear any background noise, but I do know that listeners will appreciate the circumstances. And I also ended this interview quicker than I would have liked to, for which I extend my apologies to Emma herself. For early access to ad-free full-length episodes, you can support the show at patreon.com/thecultvault. But for now, here is Emma. So hello Emma and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today and share your experiences in a group that we haven't discussed yet on the show. I'm really looking forward to this education today and learning more about the movement and your story. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hi, yes. And thanks for having me. I'm so excited to share my story with you and your listeners. And my name is Emma Buchbinder. I was raised in Dwell Community Church, which was formerly known as Xenos Christian Fellowship, and it's based in Columbus, Ohio. So Dwell is a high control religious group that is widely known as a cult. And I left at the end of 2020, and it was recently my 2-year anniversary of leaving, actually.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Life since Dwell has been challenging, but also really freeing at the same time. And my eyes have been opened a lot to the various forms of abuse that happened there. And my relationships have changed dramatically. And I'm slowly beginning to discover who I really am after being repressed for so long, and have created this really beautiful life for myself, even amidst the pain and sadness. But I'm excited to talk more about it. And
That sounds amazing. It's not often that I speak with individuals who are so freshly out of a high demand or destructive group. And I think your perspective on what your healing journey so far has looked like in the way that you've just mentioned could be really interesting to some of the listeners who are perhaps in the same space, or really in that mindset of considering a divorce from the group that they're involved in. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where our conversation goes today. And you mentioned that the original name of the church was Xenos Church.
Yes. It was, for most of the time that I was in it, called Xenos Christian Fellowship, but they had a name change back in, I think, 2000 to like 2020, maybe a little bit earlier. I forget. It's documented though. And they said it's a brand refresh, but I mean, really, it's a marketing move because there's such a bad reputation for Xenos. So it's Dwell Community Church now, and that's kind of what it's known as.
Right. So there was some bad publicity coming in the direction of Xenos Church. So they did go forward with a big rebrand to detach themselves from that publicity.
Yes. I mean, that's the real story. They would probably deny those claims, but I was, part of the church during the change. So that's basically what happened.
Do you think, off of the top of your head, any of the type of publicity that may have been in magazines or newspapers that would cause them to change their name?
I sent you several articles that are from our local paper, like the Columbus Dispatch and things like that, but it's also just very well known by word of mouth around OSU's campus specifically, but also around Columbus and Ohio at large, that Xenos is a cult. There are several websites. One of them's called Xenos is a cult. It's just, I think that there is just so much public and private negativity toward that name, specifically because of their actions associated with it, that they tried to distance themselves by changing it.
Do you think that it's working at all?
I don't think so. It's funny because since I left, I think that there has been even more publicity, even following the name change, which sometimes I am grateful for because I feel advocated for, and I'm excited that, awareness is being spread. But on the other side, on the other hand, I'm like, I wish that this wasn't happening right now and I could just heal and kind of try to forget about it. So there's still a lot of talk about Dwell and its new name and how it's really damaging place to be, and has created a lot of pain for people.
Was this a church that you were born into, or something that you joined later in life?
So I was born into Dwell and fully embraced the messaging as I got older. I was a great recruiter through middle school and high school, and I didn't really have anything close to a high school or college experience because my main focus was on recruiting the people around me instead of actually being their friends. So yeah, and I moved into one of their communal living houses on OSU's campus too, called a ministry house when I was just 16, which was also a significant turning point it was the same time that I began taking on leadership roles in the college group too, as a 16-year-old. So yeah, I was born into it, but also took very personal ownership of being part of the group.
Did your parents meet in the church, or was this a church that they joined once they were together?
They joined, my mom joined when she was with my dad already. And then my dad was pretty apprehensive, but ended up joining as well. And they're still members today.
When you say apprehensive, that's interesting to me. Do you think that your father has fully committed and converted to the idea of Dwell, or do you think that it's something that he attends because he understands that it's important to your mum?
I think he definitely identifies with their messages now. They were leaders at one point even. They're not anymore, but yeah, he's a big proponent of what they're doing there.
And when you were growing up in Xenos, was it just yourself, or were you a number of children?
Yeah, I have an older brother and a younger sister who were involved too, who were involved. My brother was actually kicked out of Dwell for actions that I believe warranted legal action instead of just like dismissal from the congregation. And then my sister remains in Dwell with no plans to leave that I'm aware of. And I've actually played a large part in her being where she is, regrettably.
Interesting insight into that dynamic. I think what you mentioned there about legal action is such a common theme that we hear amongst high demand religious groups, where individuals that really should be held accountable for certain actions with law enforcement, as opposed to what leadership believe is the right decision to make in a religious setting, is really something that I think needs to be tackled more and more. I know that recently there's been some articles in the news where a group of Jehovah's Witnesses in Pennsylvania have recently been charged with historical cases of sexual assault on minors. But that was covered up for decades by the church. And I think what we're seeing more and more is an understanding that every person has to abide by the law of the country they live in, but not everybody has to practice religion. And I think soon that distinction will be too difficult for churches to hide from. And hopefully we're now seeing a chain reaction of some congregations thinking, well, actually, look at all of those other groups that have been investigated because they've covered things up, and so we shouldn't be taking that same route. And that's all we can hope for, really.
Right.
You mentioned that you were heavily involved in church activities as a teenager.
Yeah.
Was this true for you and your family growing up in the church as a child before you took on those responsibilities?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was, I mean, as soon as I could drive, I was barely home because I was attending meetings. That was only in high school, but in college, the schedule is much more demanding. And yeah, it was just kind of par for the course. Xenos or Dwell took on the higher priority of anything else, whether that was sports or extracurriculars or even family time. So
would you say that your parents would take on extra church related activities as well?
Yeah, they did. I mean, part of being a leader when they were leaders, you have to attend a lot of different meetings for that. I mean, the schedule is just wild for everyone. But yeah, they were constantly hosting people and preparing for teachings and things like that. It's hard to describe how demanding it was. I mean, when I left, I was in the college group, and at one point I calculated the amount of time that I used to devote weekly to meetings when I was a college leader in training, as well as helping out in a high school group. And I had like 3 disciples at the time who also had disciples, and I was committing over 40 hours a week just to dwell. Over 40. I mean, and that's not including like then having to work either a full-time job or be in school full-time, preparing for teachings, exercising, meal prepping in a kitchen that 10 other people were using, and then spending time with family and other people outside of the church, trying to recruit them. I mean, it was just, well, that's a whole nother topic, because they didn't really want people to sleep very much. But it's truly so physically, emotionally, mentally exhausting. I don't believe you have genuine relationships. And I've only learned that since I left. But I think that the constant busyness is like a tactic. It's like a large factor in keeping people there, because they don't have time to slow down and even imagine a different life for themselves. So yeah, I mean, that was the degree that I was involved most of the time. And my siblings and parents were not far off from that either.
At what point did you know that you were going to commit your life and all of this time to the church? Were you a younger child and you would look at the older children perhaps and say that's what I want to do?
I didn't really like think I had another option necessarily. I didn't picture my life. I didn't picture any other alternative. It was just that was how my life was going to go. And then when I was 16 and starting to hang around college kids, that was a big, that just the jump from high school to college was a big thing, especially doing it at least 2 years earlier than a lot of people did. But I was definitely fully committed at that point. I mean, my parents weren't supportive of me moving out into a ministry house, but I insisted and even threatened to be legally emancipated. And my leaders were prompting me the whole time to do that, saying that it was God's plan for me.
I mean, this is really interesting, because a lot of the time, children of high demand religious groups that are born into groups are, of course, told that obedience to their parents or primary caregivers is necessary, but the authority will always come from leadership. But it almost seems at this point that that the parent side of things was bypassed for you, and the influence was coming directly from leadership onto yourself.
Yeah. And I think that was often the case, actually. Leaders were quick to villainize a person's parents and say that they were crazy or extreme or unloving for not supporting the person being fully committed to dwell.
How many people were in your congregation, roughly?
In the college group alone, there's over 1,000 people.
Wow. So it's a pretty big movement.
It's very large. And they have branches in, I think, Cleveland and Cincinnati, and also somewhere in Ireland. I did another podcast and had people from Ireland even reaching out to me saying that Xenos hurt them there, which is crazy. I mean, not that I doubt that. It's just like so far reaching, the abuse.
But also, on the flip side of that, shows how far-reaching people's testimonies can be and validating for others all around the world. So it's really
That's
incredible
true.
that you continue to offer your story up to people. And I had no idea that the congregation that you were in was so significant in size. Usually that type of micromanagement comes from a smaller church environment, and you're talking here about something that's not quite like that. So how many people were in leadership? You've mentioned disciples and disciples of disciples as well. So I'm starting to recognize that there's a type of pyramid.
Yeah. While it's so large, it is controlled on a micro level by different levels of leadership. And that's a big cop out that Dwell actually uses, saying like, well, we don't know what's going on in every group. But to me, that's actually really concerning. They're just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying like, well, I didn't do it. So we'll pretend that the victim is actually lying. So there are home churches of normally 30 to 50 people. And most of them have, I want to say maybe like 6 leaders. These are all just kind of like general numbers. But then within each group too, you can have members that are discipling other members that aren't leaders, but they're normally like the leaders control everything. And those leaders report to leaders that are higher up, and those to higher up, more higher up than that. So it's definitely, yeah, like you said, a pyramid type structure.
And is there one specific leader or spokesperson at the top of that pyramid? Is this the person that created the Xenos movement, or has the power been passed on for generations?
So there were 2 founders in the 70s, which they're really proud of, because they're like, oh, a hippie movement, but I like that just screams cult movement to me, like the 70s. But they were the top leaders for until the name change. Actually, that was part of the branding change, is that these people are no longer in leadership, but the people that are currently the senior leaders, I think there's 2 of them right now, are just as, if not more, extreme.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that the movement was so new. I think Xenos gives a kind of air of antiquity, perhaps. Maybe that was one of the reasons behind the choice of the name, but it gives it some type of aging quality, I think.
It's an ancient Greek word, I think, but I a lot of people compare it to the Scientology movement, saying, you know, like the 70s, this weird kind of like alien sounding name.
Yeah.
Is
It's
very
very
like
close, isn't it? Xenos. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
close. It's close. So in your average congregation size of 50 to 60, with 6 or so leaders in your congregation, you mentioned that the leaders were encouraging you to move into the shared communal home at the age of 16. And this had started before your 16th birthday. Was it all of the leaderships of your smaller congregation that were encouraging the same thing?
It was mostly my main discipler who was involved in it, because she was my high school leader, and then I would follow her to her college group. The discipleship situation is very like familial, where you follow around your discipler and you're part of their like family tree almost.
And your discipler, there's a sort of reward and punishment scheme in place here for recruiting new people or getting people to agree to move into the communal home?
My case was an interesting case. They didn't typically recruit 16-year-olds as early, but the moving into the ministry house, going to the college group, becoming at basically any higher level of commitment of your time, your money, your privacy, your space was rewarded with like public recognition, words of affirmation, more freedom. You were kind of always trying to like get to that next level or collect more disciples or have your disciples be more spiritual than other people's, things like that. And the punishment was just that if you weren't succeeding in these ways, then you were considered less spiritual than other people. And you know, if there was a serious, if people didn't see your, at least your effort, or even if you did show effort but just had a pattern of not being successful, then people would start using more shaming language with you, or analyzing like where you have an issue with God or issue with your character because you're not being as successful.
If you were to add money into this situation, then it would be a pyramid scheme. Yeah, you're talking about, recruiting people, the pressure to recruit people, the rewards you get if you recruit people, the more people you have underneath you, and then those people can go out and have people underneath them. And, instead of taking away bonus checks because you're not recruiting as many people as you did last month, or because you're not as strong in your faith as you were last month, instead of taking money away, it's a different currency, isn't it? It's the spiritual currency used against you as opposed to financial. So honestly, it just sounds like if you were replacing certain rewards and punishments with the word money, you've got a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
So before your 16th birthday, before you make the big move into the communal home, you mentioned that school for you was different, perhaps for the typical student. So do you remember roughly what age that started, where you were starting to kind of preach the word of the church as opposed to, focus on friendships and schoolwork?
I was definitely trying to recruit even when I was in middle school. I think and I successfully like recruited a few of my friends at that time, but it wasn't until high school that I realized like, oh, I'm kind of a loser. And at the time I didn't care because I thought that I was more important than everyone else, that I was doing more important work, that I cared more, all the things that, I didn't need anybody because I had all my church people. But like looking back, I only spent technically 2 full years in high school, but I didn't have any friends except for like this one girl who was also in Dwell at the time. And I was friendly to people and would invite them out to my home church, and some people came, but when it came to normal high school things, that didn't exist. Extracurriculars were not a thing. And part of that was because every time I was leaving school, I was going to something that was Dwell affiliated.
And what did the typical church services look like for the Dwell community? Was it like on a Sunday? And what times would they run to? What sorts of sermons or preachers would you expect to see?
So, like I said, there were things on most nights. So for the college group, there was a central teaching on Monday nights or Thursday nights. Actually, people flipped because there were too many people. We had to like go on different weeks, but the central teaching was Monday night, and there were a select number of pretty high up leaders that would teach those nights to a few hundred college students. And then on Thursday nights, there would be the 30 to 50 people home church meetings, and that would be in someone's house, and a leader in the home church would teach that. And they were mostly discussion based, which sounds cool, but it was actually just scripted. Like it was just people, like home church members saying the right answers and wanting to get as many positive reactions to that as they could. And so if you were a new member, this is kind of a tangent, but if you were a new member sitting there, you saw all of these attractive, young, intelligent people agreeing on the same thing. And I think that was why a lot of people were like, oh, wow, maybe I should stay here. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think any of it was really genuine. And then Friday night, we would have a prayer group. And then after that, we would have like divided women's and men's groups. But on top of that, we also had like house meeting for the ministry house. If you were a leader, you would go to like 1 or 2 leaders meetings a week. Like either just the girls or the whole leaders group, or, you know, different things. And then you were expected to take classes as well, leadership training classes or electives if you had already gone through those, which I had. And then they were like, if you had a free night, you either went on your basically 4-hour once a week date with your significant other, or you were expected to hang out with the home church on those nights off if you weren't actively recruiting outside of that.
Oh my goodness. Were these meetings just about other upcoming meetings? I can't understand how much stuff there was to talk, or was it all kind of scripted services?
They were, we would go over Bible passages typically, except for the women's and men's meetings on Fridays. We would typically go through books that were written by the elders of Dwell. So yeah, I mean, I've read through the Bible cover to cover several times because we were constantly, you know, sitting there. And the thing is that I can't really open the Bible on my own anymore because the message that I heard was so distorted. Like they would take passages and just make them into something that I don't feel like God intended. And so there's just so much shame that I'm like, I don't think that this is actually what it's saying, but I can't read the Bible anymore because of that, at least not right now.
These books that were written by the elders, would these books have the sort of correct interpretations or ways that you were supposed to read the Bible?
They had, what do you mean by correct interpretations? Like it would be, are you saying it'd be like commentary from the elders of how you're supposed to take? Yeah, to some degree, I'd say that was true. There were some books that were just commentaries. And then there are some other books about like Satan and hell. And there was another book about like the body of Christ and how you need to be like interconnected with the body of Christ. And I haven't read them since I left, but I don't think that I don't think that those materials are objectively damaging. It's really like what the church did with all of those resources in action that was the most damaging. And it's funny because when confronted with that, Dwell focuses on, well, we teach people the right thing. Well, we don't want this to happen. Well, that's not our intention. But that's not the issue. The issue is what is actually happening and how the material is being disseminated and how people are being treated, like in action. It's not just what they put out there, it's what is done with it that is the most concerning. And they just brush it off, saying that they've checked all the boxes and don't think they're doing anything wrong on the outside.
There's that lack of accountability as like a continuing thread throughout your entire experience of the Xenos Church.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is so sad because for a organization claiming to be based on the forgiveness of Christ, they refuse to humble themselves. They refuse to have sympathy for the downtrodden, as the Bible, preaches as one of the most important things you could do. And they actively silence people in their stories, which devalues them as human beings. And from reading the Bible, myself, I don't understand how they think that God could be behind those things. They think that they are immune from correction or just feedback. It's sad. And that's a consistent thing as well. The leaders are always right. The people who are under them are always wrong, and humility is important for the lower than, but not for the higher up.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on the Xenos Christian Fellowship. In part 2, we focus on Emma's furthering involvement in Xenos, before her eventual escape. To get in touch with me, you can find me at Cult Vault Podcast or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.